David Rogers. Él es originario de Missouri, Estados Unidos, director de la Facultad de Programas de Marketing Digital y Estrategia de Negocios Digitales de Columbia Business School, así como fundador y coanfitrión de la aclamada conferencia Bright, organizada por esta misma universidad, donde cientos de directores generales y directores generales de marketing de empresas globales se reúnen con las principales compañías de tecnología, de medios y emprendedores para abordar los desafíos de construir marcas sólidas en el mundo de la era digital. David Rogers también ha impartido talleres y programas estratégicos para ejecutivos en cientos de empresas globales como Google, General Electric, Toyota, Visa, IBM, entre otras. Actualmente, imparte conferencias sobre transformación digital, marketing digital, Big Data y el impacto de las tecnologías emergentes en los negocios. Autor del bestseller The Digital Transformation Playbook, libro que trata sobre cómo repensar cualquier negocio tradicional rumbo a la era digital. David Rogers.
Buenos días. I'm very happy to be here in Mazatlan. I'm sorry that's all the Spanish I'll be speaking this morning. We do have wonderful translators for those of you who would like to use it. Really enjoying, my wife and I arrived here 2 days ago. Wonderful to be here in Sinaloa, the home state of your business, and this beautiful weather on the beach. I'm very happy to be able to join you here for this important annual meeting of the company. And I'm here because I want to take a little time to share some thinking with you about the opportunity of the digital era, the challenges and the true opportunities for every business, but in particular for Koppel, and how all of you can be thinking about the steps that you want to take forward to bring this company that has been so successful for so many years forward into its next stage of growth and creating opportunity for Mexican customers and for your own employees. So my own background, I come, as you heard, from Columbia University in New York City. I teach there in our business school. I teach our executive programs. So I'm not teaching the young MBAs. I'm actually teaching experienced global executives from all over the world, including your own Roberto Gutierrez, who won the prize for Employee of the Year just 2 days ago. So congratulations again to Roberto. So I met Roberto 3 years ago in New York City. He was came for one of my programs on digital strategy and leadership. In addition, at Columbia, I organize events. We have a CMO Academy with Google and Columbia Business School that I created with them. We teach that twice a year. We also have the Bright Conference, which I started 12 years ago and continues to be an opportunity to bring innovators in the digital space from all different industries together in New York City for an annual conference. When I'm not teaching or organizing events at Columbia, I try to spend my time researching and writing about the challenges that different businesses are facing and how technology and change in the digital era is changing what management and leaders and businesses need to do. Right? And when I'm not writing or teaching, I try to spend the balance of my time doing this, traveling the world, getting a chance to sit down with companies in all different industries, all different parts of the world, and really try to understand what they are grappling with, their challenges, their opportunities, how they are changing, and to try to understand what are the lessons we can learn from each other, right? And try to share some of those lessons with companies like yourself. And what I find increasingly is more and more what businesses are thinking about as I come to talk to them is about the digital era and how do we transform, this idea of digital transformation, right? And so that was the title of my last book, right? To try to capture the thinking which I'm seeing across so many different businesses and industries. And it turns out this is an international question that companies are facing. We're now actually in 9 languages, the book. It's coming out in Japanese next year, so that'll be 10 languages. But what I find is a lot of people are talking about digital transformation, right? You see it on conferences and books and blog posts, and everyone is talking about it. But what do we actually mean, right? I sometimes feel like it's not clear what are we actually talking about. So I want to start with my definition. What do we mean by digital transformation? And to me, it's very simple. It's just a question. And that question is, how does a business that started before the digital era, right, how does that kind of business need to adapt in order to evolve and grow and reach our next stage of growth in this digital economy that is all over the world today? Right? And if that's our definition, I want to point out one specific point here. This is a different challenge than how do we create a great startup, right? How do we create the next Uber, the next super fast growing a new business, right? You want to do that? Okay, you look at the world around you, you look at new technologies, you look at customer needs and new trends, and you try to identify some new white space, some opportunity that no one has seized, right? That is a very different question than how do you take an existing business. Right? If you are the New York Times, right, leading global brand in news publishing, founded over 150 years ago, right, you already have a business. You already have employees, right? You have skills, you have partners, you have ways of operating, distribution channels, a business model, what you charge for. All of these things are already in place. And so it's a very different challenge to say, how do we evolve? How do we adapt that organization? Right? Took the New York Times a long time. Right? At first, they thought the challenge was, well, we're going to send you the newspaper different ways. We'll send it to you on a CD-ROM, right? We'll send you the newspaper as an email. And it turned out what they realized was the biggest change is in their business model. How do they make money? Because they used to be a business that was run on advertising. An advertising business with a little bit of extra money from the subscribers. And what they've learned is in the digital era, the economy around content has changed so much that to survive, they have to become a business that is mostly paid for by the readers, by the subscribers, and then has some additional money for advertising. And to make that change, you have to change everything in that company, every way that everyone works inside of it, right? While still holding true to what has made them a great company. I was in Silicon Valley last year talking with the chief operating officer of Walmart, a company I think you're familiar with. And they're facing the same challenge, right? They grew to success as a physical retailer, thousands of stores. Now, of course, they're looking at the rise of Amazon. They have to compete, but what they realize is they can't become Amazon. Amazon is a very different company. But they have to think, how do we become a great business in the omni-channel era? Right? Today's customers don't want to buy in a store or online. They want both. Right? They want to buy in a store and pick up and order it, find out information online, or order it online, and if they don't like it, take it back to your store. Right? They want to have the best of both. And so Walmart is trying to figure out how can we create a unique business to meet these new expectations. I was meeting recently with Citibank, and not with their retail business, but actually with their corporate business. I know that Koppel is in financial services, many of you, and they are trying to figure out, this was their leadership team for Latin America, actually. And they were there for a meeting, and I was speaking to them, trying to understand how do business customers, what are their changing needs, right? In terms of their corporate banking, what are the new problems they're facing, and how is Citi going to adapt in order to meet the needs, the changing needs of today's businesses? Now, if you look at all of these examples, one thing I would say stands out. Digital transformation is fundamentally not about the technology. In fact, if I were going to condense the entire book into one slide, this is that slide. The hard part of transformation is not putting in place the technology. yes, that will be part of your execution and your implementation, and it takes time, and it takes money. But the hardest part is actually not the technology. It's changing the way we think as a company. How do we think about our business and our future? And the reason that is so hard is because companies are like individuals. Companies are like people. And when a person is born, how many of you have children? Probably most of us, almost all of us. So when your child is born, just as a baby, right, their brain is very different than ours. Very different brain. And what we're learning from neurology is the brain is different because the connections between their neurons are changing constantly at every moment. Right? And they're just soaking up everything around them. They're very receptive to stimulus, right? That's how they start learning language very quickly. But what happens is, as we grow, our brains change. And our brains start to lay down, it's like laying down railroad tracks or putting out a highway system. We start to fix the lines in our brains between the neurons. They're no longer changing at every moment. They're becoming etched like a map. And what that does is that allows us to gain all sorts of skills. We learn language, we develop social skills, we can walk into a room and tell what people are feeling. We can do many amazing things. We develop intuition in areas of expertise. We learn to ride a motorcycle, if you're Roberto, all these skills. But what changes as our brain evolves is we are less perceptive of everything around us. Right? So we become very good at certain patterns, but if you take a person and put them in a very unexpected environment, an adult is much less likely to actually see what has changed around them than a small child, right? Because they are so used to the patterns from the past. This is the same challenge that companies face, right? Companies are like people, and so you build a company up over time, and you establish your organizational structure and your processes and your systems, the way you get your goods to market, your partnerships, your channels, all of these things are established over time, and you get very good at them, and you become very skilled. The hardest part is when you change that environment of that company, say, take that from the pre-digital era and put that company now in the digital era. The hardest part is to even look around you and see what has changed, to start to think differently about all the assumptions you've made. So that is what I try to focus on with companies. How do we actually learn to think differently about our business? And in doing so, what I found is helpful is to look at 5 familiar domains of business strategy. Any business class you took, you probably heard something about these. And to see how we have to think differently about each of them. How do we now have to think differently about our customers than we did in the past? How do we have to think differently about our competition? How do we think differently in the digital era about data, about innovation, and about value? What is our value proposition to the world? Right? So I want to talk a little bit this morning about each of these 5 domains, how we have to think differently about them in the digital era, and show you a few stories of some companies that I think can shed some light on this as we think about doing this ourselves in couple. So the first domain of digital transformation is customers. We have to think differently about our relationship to all of our customers. Now, traditionally, in the pre-digital era, businesses grew through what we called a mass market model, right? It was all about broadcasting to the customer. The customer is out there, right? And you use mass media to advertise to them, and you use mass production and distribution systems to deliver the things that they need. The customer is very passive, right? And it's all about efficiency of getting to them. But the relationship to customers is very different now. Right? In the digital era, it's better not to think of the customer as a target, but think of them as a network. All of these customers are now connected to each other and to your business and to all the other businesses through all of these new digital tools and connections. And so we have to interact very differently, and we have to realize their expectations are very different, right? They now expect us to be in so many more places. So one example of a company I see making this change in their thinking is Domino's. How many of you are familiar with Domino's Pizza? Okay, Domino's is well established here. So, Domino's Pizza has been around for some time. Now, when they first started, does anyone remember their original promise to the customer when they started the company? 30 minutes or free. Exactly. Perfect. You all get an A. 30 minutes or it's free. It was a brilliant piece of marketing because you guarantee the customer is happy. Perfect customer satisfaction. Because either the product comes super fast and convenient, and you say, wow, that was really easy and great, or they get a free pizza, and they're very happy that way too. I remember when I was in high school, right? This was back in the day, in the 1980s, and you go out on lunch break, and you would go to, for the young people, this is a telephone. Okay, just to explain. You pick up the phone and I dial the number and say, I want a pizza, and then the pizza would, and I'd check my watch, and I'd say, I hope it's late. I hope it's late, right? It was brilliant. So the company did really well. But over time, consumers, especially young people, are very different today. Their expectations, their definition of convenience is not this, right? This was mine back then. That is not cutting-edge convenience today. So now, what Domino's is doing is they're taking the same promise to the customer and making it again for today's connected customers, right? And so what they have is you can now order your Domino's pizza anywhere, as they say, right? You can order it through Twitter. There's an app, of course, on your phone. It actually uses artificial intelligence, so you can speak into it. You can say, I want a pizza with 1/2 pepperoni, 1/2 shrimp, right? And, right, shrimp, mazalan. And then it takes your order. And then it's like Uber. You can see the pizza coming to you, right? Oh, the pizza is in the oven. The pizza has left the oven. The pizza is in the car. The car is on the way. It's very exciting. People love it, right? But you can order it through your Amazon Alexa. You can literally text an emoji of a slice of pizza to Domino's, and they'll send you back an actual pizza. So it's everywhere. And this is really connected with young customers, and the brand is growing very successfully again. And they're continuing to innovate around this promise of convenience. And so, in Europe, where you have some older cities with narrow streets, they have rolling autonomous delivery bots that will roll along the sidewalk and bring you your pizza, right? In America, lots of big highways, they have a special car that they've created the compartment in the back to keep the pizza at the perfect temperature on its way to you, right? In New Zealand, very mountainous country, yes, they are actually testing flying drone delivery of pizzas, right? Their CEO who led them through this transformation, Patrick Doyle, he said, we are as much a technology company as we are a pizza company, right? Think of that. Can you say that about your own business, right? But they are still a pizza company. I want to point out, they haven't changed everything. The product is still tasty food that you put in your mouth, right? And yet they are using the digital technology to build that promise to the customer. And the results have been phenomenal. This company went public in 2010. They were a private business before then they went public. If you bought $100 of stock in 2010 in Google, who also had just gone public, $100 in Domino's, which one do you think is worth more today? It's actually Domino's, if you can believe it. Phenomenal growth story. All right. So the second thing that I said we have to think differently about in the digital era is competition. And really this comes down to who are we competing with, right? And most of us, we have a familiar set, whatever your business is. Oh, who's our competition? And certain companies come to mind, right? So, for example, when I'm speaking to the automotive industry, if you're a Toyota, right? You think of other companies that manufacture cars. Who's our competition? Honda, Ford, General Motors, you could add others. I would include Tesla, right? Tesla is a very innovative business, but they are also manufacturing cars to sell to the customer, right? They're trying to compete in the same space. But at the same time, if you're Toyota today, you also have to think about some very different kinds of competitive threats. Any guesses? What would you say is a competitor or a potential threat to a Toyota, a company that doesn't make cars? Uber, right? All of the ride-hailing services like Uber. Who else? What was that? Herod? Car rental services, right? Any kind of a service, right? Maybe also software businesses, right? Google has been one of the early innovators in driverless car technology, which still is only starting to come to the market, but could be very impactful. Now, the interesting thing about these companies is they don't actually want to put Toyota out of business. It's not the same as like a Honda, right? Uber still needs cars, and they're perfectly happy if the driver drives a Toyota, right? Google, take it from me, you can check back in 10 years and tell me if I was wrong, Google is not going to manufacture cars, right? They won't do it. There's not enough money in it, right? It's too capital intensive. All they want to do is make the software, right? They want to be like Bill Gates. They want to be the Microsoft Windows of cars. So whatever car you get, Toyota, BMW, whoever it is, it has to have Google because Google has the best software. That's their strategy if they can make it succeed. So the point is each of these businesses may succeed, but depending on what happens and their strategy and Toyota's strategy, Toyota still may be making the cars, for example, for Google, but who makes all the money when you buy a laptop? Is it Hewlett-Packard or is it Microsoft? Who makes the real profit? It's Microsoft. Microsoft keeps most of the profit because they have more power and more value. And so that's the kind of threat we're looking at here. Who will be the more important business in this ecosystem? Will it be the car maker, or the software maker, or the service provider? These different companies, each playing a different role. And so when we think about who do we compete with as Koppel in each of your business units, you have to think, I would say, about two kinds of competition, right? What I call your symmetric competitors. These are companies that are competing with your value proposition. You offer a service, they offer another version of that service, and they have the same business model, right? These companies have to invest in the same kinds of assets, hire the same kinds of people. They're delivering a similar offering at a similar price, right? At the same time, you have to ask, who is our asymmetric competition, right? These are companies that offer value that competes with yours in some sense, right? It may not replace it, but they want to be the more important value. But they have a very different business model, right? And so for Google to succeed or Uber to succeed, it's very different people they need. It's different intellectual property. It's very different assets. They don't need a manufacturing plant. They need a software server farm, right? Very different economics, very different business model. And therefore, the way that you compete or manage that relationship is very different than what we think of as sort of our traditional competition, all right? So really important that we take this more broad view. All right, the third domain that I said we have to think differently about in the digital era is data. Now, data is not new to business, right? I was talking last night with one of your executives about some of the systems that manage the data for all of your stores, you know, and these systems have been integral to the business for decades now, right? So data has always been part of how every successful business manages its processes. What is different today is data is not just a way to manage our process. It is actually becoming a strategic asset. The data itself is valuable. And if we can grow and build the right kind of data, we can start to use that data to create new benefits for the customer and for the business. It's a very different way of thinking about data. So I'll give you two examples. This one comes from China. Right? You guys familiar with Alibaba? right? Very successful business. Started as a retailer, right? Online, selling products. Then they found a challenge. I think you guys know, some of the people who wanted to buy from them, it was hard to buy. They didn't have credit cards. How do you buy online? So they went into financial services. They created a payment system, Alipay, very successful. So now they're in China, they're selling products, and they're also managing the payment. And then they started looking at all the data they had, right? So now they know not just what did you buy from us, but they know who did you send money to, how much money are you paying and saving, and what's happening with all of your payment accounts. And they looked at that data and they said, what could we do with that? Well, one of the things they've done that's been very successful, they have created a credit scoring system that is actually the leading credit service now in China. China didn't have a very strong credit service. So now, if you want to buy a house in China, and you want to get a loan, a mortgage, who's going to say whether or not you are to the bank that you are reliable to pay for that mortgage? Alibaba does, right? Because they have the data and they can predict who you should give a loan to or not. They give the credit score, all using the value of the data they already had. Here's another more traditional business. So Caesars Entertainment has been around for a long time. They are famous for their casinos, of course, their hotels, restaurants, resort properties. How many people have been to Las Vegas? All right. Who's been to a Caesars, stayed at a Caesars resort? Yeah? What's your name? Abel? Abel? Okay, so Abel goes to Caesars. All right, so you're a customer. You make your reservation. Abel probably remembers this. The first thing that happens, you make your hotel reservation, and they say, would you like to join our loyalty program? Look, you already made a reservation. You're going to get 100 points right away just for that reservation. And here's all the nice things you can get with the points, right? They call it total rewards. And you say, okay, I guess I'll sign up. And then they say, well, that's not all. Here's your card. When you're here, use it everywhere. If you eat in a restaurant, you get extra points. If you buy a ticket to a show, you'll get more points. If you go to the casino, you'll get more points, right? Now, why is Caesars doing that, right? They've been doing this for years. They're one of the most successfully run businesses in this industry. It's because they are very focused on the customer. And they want to know what the customer is doing over time. They don't want to just see, oh, you walked in, it's a Saturday, and how much did you spend tonight? They want to know, are you a repeat customer? Are you someone who comes to Las Vegas for business every year, right? Is this a relationship we want to invest in? And so they use all of this data to measure what is called customer lifetime value. How much value will this customer bring to our business, not today, not this weekend, but over their entire lifetime? Right? It's a prediction. You look at the data you have on them, and you look at the past data on all your other customers, and just like a credit score, you make a prediction. Right? And that helps them know which customers are very valuable. And Abel may show up, and they may know he's a valuable customer. It's not that he goes to the casino and throws out thousands of chips everywhere, right? He's not a big spender, but he's a regular customer, and he comes back, and sometimes he brings his family, and he comes every year for business, and they say, this is an important customer to us. Now, it used to be, what would Caesars do with this data? They had very old systems, right? And they would take the data, and Abel would come for a visit, and he would eat in the restaurant and stay in the hotel, and then he'd go home, and they'd take that data, and they'd go down in the basement, and they have a big mainframe computer running Fortran or COBOL, and they would crunch through the numbers, and about a week later, they would produce an output, and they would mail a letter to Abel's home, and the letter would arrive, and he'd open up and say, thank you for your visit. You have earned 212 points, and here's some rewards you could use it for, okay? All right, so that was their strategy. But now in the digital era, this has all changed. What we can do with data, the kinds of predictions we can make, and the speed at which we can do them is so different. So I was talking with their last chief marketing officer, Tariq Shaukat, and he said what we can do now, we make that same understanding of the customer not in a week, not in a day, but in a minute or seconds. And so now we can use that data not just to mail you something when you get home, but to change your experience while you are with us. And so now what happens, Tariq explained to me, they say Abel comes, he comes for a visit, he finishes his business, and it's Friday night, he goes to the casino, and he puts in his card to get the points, and he starts playing blackjack. And he's losing, right? But he won't stop. For some reason, he just keeps playing, right? And he's losing more and losing more, right? They can see this happening in real time, right? And they look at this and they say, well, this isn't good. What if Abel has a terrible night and he says, my luck has run out at Caesars. Next time, the Bellagio, right? Gonna try another casino. No, they don't want that. Now, what Tariq told me is this. He said, they won't actually fix the table so that you win. Sorry. But what they will do is they'll send a message to one of their staff, one of their people on the floor of the casino. Right then, they'll tell them a little bit about the customer, and they'll give them a budget, and they say, you use your experience, your skill as a customer service person to make them happy, right? And so they'll walk up to Abel and they say, oh, it's great to have you back. So nice to see you in Caesars again. You usually come in the fall, right? How do you like it in the spring? Oh, good. And how's your room? I know you're in the suite this time, right? Wonderful. It's so good to see you. And then they give him some surprise, right? Maybe it's a free steak dinner. Maybe it's tickets to Cirque du Soleil, right? Something he wasn't expecting and that does not use any of his points. It's just a special thank you. And psychologists have studied, we respond very differently to the rewards that we are working towards than the rewards that come to us unexpectedly, right? And it triggers something in our brain, and Abel feels really happy, and he thinks, oh, I had a terrible night at blackjack, but Caesars is a nice place. You know, they know me, they like me. But the best part is, Caesars doesn't just hope this will work, because they have the data, they can test if it works. And they see, well, what does happen? Does Abel still come back within 12 months like he normally does, or not? And if we give different rewards to different customers who we want to keep, which one works better than the other, right? All because they have the data, and they're using it not just to run their business, but to create new value and new experiences for the customer, all right? Very different way of thinking about data. So the fourth domain that we have to think differently about in the digital era is innovation. Now, innovation is tricky because innovation is always inherently risky. Because whenever you're innovating, you're doing something new, right? And so you don't know if it's going to work. Now, how do we manage that risk? All right? That's a perennial question for any business. When you're trying something new, how do you manage the risk? Now, the traditional approach that we taught in business schools for years was that you manage the risks of innovation through planning, right? You get some smart people together, and you get a lot of background research. Maybe some consultants come in with some reports, and you look at all the data, and you think about it, and you get the most experienced people in the company who really know the market, and they think about it some more, and they pick a course of action, and then they plan out all the things we're going to do, and step 1, and step 2, and 12-month plan, and 3-year plan, and this is our new strategy, right? It really comes down to a big bet, and a very expensive bet, because the scale of these plans that get implemented. Sometimes it works, right? Sometimes it doesn't. And that's always been the nature of innovation. It's sort of high stakes, right? Sometimes you make a big bet and win, sometimes you don't. The problem is in the digital era, we have to make so many choices. We have to change so many things. You cannot afford that anymore, right? That kind of big high stakes bet and cross your fingers and hope the smart people get it right this time is just too risky. And so we're seeing a whole new model of innovation emerge. And instead of dealing with risk through planning, we deal with it through learning, right? Designing innovation as a series of experiments that help us to learn in very quick, small, cheap ways what might be the best opportunity for us. Right. So let me show you an example of one company who's made this shift in their mindset. So Intuit is a company in financial services, and they create products mostly for small businesses. Right? And they've been successful doing this for years. Products, software, tools to help you do your taxes, do your payroll, manage your accounts as a small business, right? Things like that. Now, they started and they built the product they hoped would work, and in their first 20 years, they had some very expensive failures. Products they thought would be great, and they built the whole thing, and they launched it in the market, and it just wasn't what people were looking for, right? Fortunately, they had some other products that succeeded very well, and so the company stayed and grew over time. But after 20 years, the founders said, we can't keep innovating this way. Every product launch, I stay up all night. Oh my God, are we going to lose a ton of money? Right? And so they said, what if we can learn from the smaller startups of the digital era about how they innovate? And they innovate by being very flexible. And they put something out there very cheap, and then they change it and see if people like it, and then they change something else. They change the product every day, and they measure the data to see what's happening. Right? So they thought about, what if we learn to innovate through experimentation? That was how they talk about it. Their first team was led by this woman, Deepa Bachu, and she was in India in their emerging markets group. And this was their challenge, their innovation challenge. Can we create a financial product for Indian farmers? Farmers, because that's the most common small business in India, right? So they said, well, okay, we'll do something for the farmers. And they said, we want to raise their income by 10%. Now, they didn't say, we're going to take our tax product and make it TurboTax Farmer or some other successful product. They said, we need to somehow benefit these farmers. That's the only way the product is going to succeed. So they spent some time with the farmers learning about their business. So it turns out in India, the farmers will grow their products, their produce, maybe beans or rice or vegetables, and they'll harvest it. Then they have to sell it. Now, to sell it, the farmer has to take these goods to a marketplace, right? And because of the state of the roads in the rural parts of India and their cost of fuel and their resources, they can only really take it to one or two different villages, right? They can't afford more. So if they get to the second village and they don't have a good price, they just got to sell it for anything they can take, right? Now, when they're selling it, they meet with someone who's called a mandi agent, right? That's the buyer. And the mandi agent is very secretive. So they meet with you in person and they whisper, let me see your rice, let me see your soybeans. And then they'll literally take a cloth and cover their hand if I'm signaling a price to her so that you don't see what the price was, right? So very secretive, right? All right, so Intuit looked at this and they said, we should be able to do something to improve this system, right? There are few options, lack of transparency, pricing is suboptimal. Surely we can do something that will improve the outcome for the farmer and maybe even for both sides. All right. So their first idea was this. We should create an online auction, right? Something like an eBay or any of the others that are very successful where people go online, you want to sell something, I want to buy something, and we can scroll through and find each other, right? They said, so we'll build something like that, and the buyers and sellers you'll find, these are always proven to work very well. Everyone gets a better price, actually, right? Because it's a much more efficient economic system with a greater transparency. And so you would agree what you're going to buy, you would sell, you pay for it, and then you deliver the products, right? That was the vision. They didn't build the product, right? Instead, they went out and started talking to the customers. And they made a very simple prototype, just to sort of show what it would look like, what the screen looks like, and how would you use it. And they talked to the farmers. Now the farmers, they said, look, so you make the deal, you find your buyer, you sell online, and only then do you get on the truck. The farmers like that? Of course. They said, that's great. That would solve my biggest problem. I know where I'm going. I only have to pay petrol fuel for one trip. They all loved it. Now, what do you think the buyers said? Did the buyers like it? No. They hated it. Why did they hate it? What was their biggest problem with this idea? Any guesses? Why would the buyer not like this online auction? They can't touch it. Right? We often think, experienced business people, we say, well, there's too much competition. They're losing leverage. We think of these abstract ideas. For the buyers, they say, I have to touch the product. Right? If I'm going to buy your tomatoes, I have to see your tomatoes. I don't know if I'm going to pay this much for your tomatoes or his tomatoes. I have to actually see them and touch them. Right? That's a tough problem to solve with an online auction. So they said, okay, maybe this won't work. Let's put this one on hold. They said, we got another idea. Let's make things simpler. Forget the buyers. Let's just do something with the farmers. We'll create an online portal where they can all share information. What are you growing? Which crops? How much? When are you harvesting it? Where did you sell it, right? How much are you growing next season? And then the farmers can use that information to make better business decisions, right? Again, they didn't build the product. They made a very simple prototype and started talking to farmers and showing it to them. Now, the farmers liked the idea. They said, okay, yeah, I'd like to have that data. That would be interesting to see what other people are growing and selling. But the more they talked to the farmers about how they would use the data, when they would use the data, it wasn't really clear how it would change the business decisions of the farmers. They weren't really sure what decisions they would make differently with this data. So it seemed like something that would be nice to have, but probably not a big impact on their business, right? Probably not that 10% more income. That's a big impact on your business. So then they had another idea. They said, well, what if we used flip phones? Everyone seemed to have a basic phone at that point, either themselves or they could access from a neighbor or a friend. And they said, what if we use text messaging and we had a recommendation engine? So you say, I would like to sell rice, or I would like to buy soybeans, and there's no deal, there's no auction. It just says, oh, we recommend you talk to this buyer, right? Or, oh, you're trying to buy this. We suggest you might want to talk to this farmer or that farmer, right? Just these introductions recommending who might be a good person to interact with. Now, is that going to work? They don't know, right? Lots of questions they had. First of all, most of the farmers are illiterate. They can't read. So how's that going to work, right? Even if they can read, will they follow this advice, right? If all we say is, oh, we suggest you talk to this buyer, are you really going to get on the truck with all your goods and go there? And can we actually make good recommendations? What if we tell who, you talk to this person, you talk to that person, and it doesn't work, right? Lots of questions. They did not build the product. Instead, they asked themselves, what's the simplest, cheapest, quickest way that we can test these big questions we have, right? Take some of the uncertainty out of it. So what they did was very ingenious. They just had two people driving around in Range Rovers, town to town, just talking to the farmers and the buyers and explaining, yeah, here's the number, just text in what you want to buy, what you want to sell, and just wait a couple hours, you'll get a suggestion, right? They just explained it. And then they had one guy sitting at a desk, right? Picture this. He's got a big wooden desk. He's sitting there with a bunch of phones and pieces of paper. And every time he gets the text message, he just writes it down. Oh, so-and-so wants to buy rice. So-and-so wants to buy soybeans. So-and-so just sold some tomatoes, right? And then as the next message comes in, he looks at the paper and makes his best guess. He says, you want to sell soybeans? I'm going to suggest you talk to that person. You want to buy rice? I'm going to suggest you talk to that person. He texts them back. All right. So what happened with the experiment? It turned out the illiterate farmers all had a friend or a family member. They could get someone to help them read the message. So the literacy problem was solved. Secondly, even though they didn't know how it was working, the farmers all believed in the system. They didn't know it was one guy sitting at a desk. They just said, oh, it's coming from the internet. It must know everything, right? I will put all my faith in it, and I'll take its advice, right? But most importantly, when they took the advice and they followed the suggestions afterwards, Intuit surveyed them, and they said, was that helpful? Would you do it again, right? And the farmers said things like, yeah, that was good. I didn't get my best price ever, but I only had to go to one place, and we had a quick deal, and I was really glad to do the deal, right? And the buyers said things like, I don't buy from everyone that's coming to me, but at least the people who are coming to me now are bringing the right kinds of produce. They're not bringing me things I'm not interested in. So this is making my job easier. Yes, I would like to continue doing it, right? Only then, after they had tested sort of the biggest questions about this innovation, did they write a single line of software code to create a product that could scale up to more than one guy sitting at a desk, right? And by the time they had 1 million farmers on the system, they were measuring a 20% increase in their income, right? Double the original goal. But the most important thing here is what I learned from their chief innovation officer talking to her afterwards. And she said, we have not gotten any smarter at Intuit. We still have the same number of ideas that we think are going to be great, and it's going to work, it's going to be wonderful, and it just doesn't work for some reason, right? Turns out to have a problem. The difference is, she said, each of those ideas cost us much, much, much less in time, in money, and in people, right? And so we can pursue many more innovations with the same amount of resources, right? And this really comes down to what I think of as a change in the cycle of innovation. Now, traditionally, the way we used to do innovation, you observe the customer or the market, right? Then you generate some ideas. What could we do? Brainstorming. And then what do you do next? You analyze, you discuss, you bring in the data, you have a team meeting, and eventually you come to a decision. All right, this is the best course forward. And then you design the product, you build the product, you market the product, you launch the product, and you cross your fingers, right? And hope, hope that it works. But by then you've invested a lot. You're going to learn something important, but you spent a lot of money to learn that, right? When you innovate through rapid experimentation, what happens is you just bring the customer response in much earlier, right? So you start the same. You have to observe the customer, learn from the market. You generate ideas. But then you do not try to pick which of these is going to succeed. Instead, you ask yourself, how can we design the best test to quickly, easily learn from the market? Is this really what they need? Is this really feasible? Is it usable? Will it work in reality? Right? And bringing in that customer response as early as possible. And if it is positive, you repeat the process. It's a shorter process that you do many times. We say it's iterative. You keep iterating. And at the end, you wind up, what allows you to do is you can pursue more ideas. The ones that don't work cost you much less. But the ones that do work, you still gain all of the benefits, right? Who wouldn't like an investment like that? All right, so that's innovation. The last domain of digital transformation is value. How do we think differently about the value that we bring to the world and to markets and our customers? Right? And the shift here in mindset is for businesses that have been around and successful for many, many years. How do we shift from thinking about sustaining our business, protecting, defending the position that we've built up successfully over time, and instead think about how are we continually adapting, right? Small steps every day so that we are evolving the business for the future. All right? This involves some really significant questions we have to ask ourselves in every company today, right? Why does our business exist? Bluntly, why are we here? What needs do we serve? Are they still relevant to today's customers? And what business are we really in? What are we really selling here, and to whom? I want to give one example of this is actually a great museum that's going through the same question process as companies all over the world. So the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City is one of the world's great art museums. It's been around for 150 years. It's still very successful. Lots of people come in every day, right? It's one of the top tourist attractions in New York City. So that's not the problem. But the leadership of the museum now, for years, has been asking themselves, they say, the world around us is changing so much. And the way that we experience art, culture, history, aesthetics, All these things that our museum has been about for so many years, we're all experiencing those very differently in the digital era. So how does a museum adapt? How do we evolve? How do we think about other kinds of value that we can create for the public at large? It's not about getting rid of the galleries, right? The galleries are all still there. You still have these great spaces full of artworks, but what else can we do? How can we connect people with all of this beauty and history and culture in ways that was not possible before? And so they have a whole team working on this called the Digital Met. And they've done many things, right? One of their first projects was creating a great app. Now the Met, like many businesses, had the problem. You say, oh, apps, that's terrific. Everyone gets excited, and all of a sudden every department has its own app, right? Do you really want to have 12 apps for the museum as a visitor? No, right? And you don't want to have one giant app either, because trust me, if you go to the Guggenheim Museum, you have to get there early. It'll take you an hour to download the app. Trust me. This app was made to be very simple, very easy, downloads very quickly, so the visitor who comes can quickly plan out, what do I want to see on this visit, and how do I find it? How do I navigate this very large museum? It's very simple, easy interface, right? Very enhancing of the experience of the visitor. But they're doing other things. They're using new digital media to tell different stories about the artworks that they acquire. So traditionally, when the Met would buy a painting or a museum, a painting or a sculpture or other artwork, it would be about 6 months before you saw it in the museum, right? No one would see it. They have to prepare it. They do a lot of research on it. You know, who first made it? Who has owned it since then? What's the history of this piece? Do a lot of cataloging. They may have to prepare it, to clean it, to preserve it. Right? Now what they've started doing is, as soon as they buy a new piece of art, they're using video and Instagram and social media and blog posts, all these different media to tell stories about what did we just discover? What did we buy? What are we learning about it? What kind of preparations are being done? How are the colors changing as we wipe away centuries of dust from the baby's toes on this family portrait, right? It turns out people are fascinated by this. People all over the world are watching and reading and listening to podcasts, many of whom, most of whom, have never been inside the museum, right? And yet they're connecting with these art and stories in new ways. They're doing other things. They have data now, data on every single artwork they own, right? And they've opened up that data to others. They have a hackathon. Anyone can play around with the data and innovate something. So one day they had the hackathon, and a student from Columbia, Regina Flores-Mir from our School of the Arts, she came down to the Metropolitan. She worked with the data, and she created a web app where you stream music. And so she picked, there were a dozen songs by famous hip-hop artists, you know, Drake, Jay-Z, Missy Elliott, Kanye West. You pick a song, and it streams the song from the web, right? But as it plays the song, it picks out the key words in the lyrics. And then it looks for those words in the database of the Metropolitan Museum. And so what you experience is, while you hear your favorite song, you have this visual collage of all these different artworks from throughout human history that are connected to the themes of the song, but different every time you play it, right? Amazing experience. Young people loved it, something that the Metropolitan would never have come up with on their own. They said, we never in a million years would have thought of this, right? My friend Sri Srinivasan was their first chief digital officer, and when he was there, he said, our competition is not other museums. It's Netflix. It's games like Candy Crush. We're fighting for attention. I would argue they're fighting for relevance. In fact, every business today has to fight to be as relevant in the lives of your customers tomorrow as you were relevant to them in their lives yesterday. Right? That is the fundamental challenge we all face. Right? So those are the 5 domains. And in the book, I talk about this in more detail. There are specific strategic planning tools and more concepts for each of the 5 domains, thinking about how do we really apply this to our own business, the decisions we're making, our own customer segments, our own business challenges. Right? But I want to leave you guys with some short practical advice as well, beyond the book, for those who don't have the book yet. Thinking about what I've seen in so many different organizations today, what are some of the best practices in getting started? So the first I would say is you have to know your reason why. Why are you doing this? Why are you transforming your company, Koppel, right? And it cannot be because you heard a talk by David Rogers, right? Or I read a book, something. No, or this company, Amazon did this, or Citibank is doing that. You have to figure out for your business, for your customers, your history, your market, your future, why does this matter? Why is it so important to you, right? Everyone has to understand that around the whole company. It's really important to understand the reason why this must happen and for everyone to know it. The second is to take a broad view. Yes, you want to use digital technology to improve your current business, to improve, to save costs, to do faster and better what you've always done. But don't stop there, right? Don't only digitize the things you've always done. You've got to also be thinking about what could we do in the future that we've never done in the past, right? Like the Metropolitan Museum we just saw. Think about new things you could do, new offerings, new ways of interacting with customers, new services you could create because of the new capabilities you have. Third, always, always focus on the customer, right? If you want to know, if you want to ground your new digital strategies in something that's going to matter, always take the customer's point of view, right? What matters to them? Think about your customers and think both about today's customers, right? Your average customer today, if you will, your most valuable, your most important, but you also have to think about tomorrow's, right? If you look at, in most industries, the newer customers who are coming into the market today, younger customers, different expectations, very soon they're going to be your main customers. And you will very likely see very different expectations in them. They don't want the same product or service in the same fashion as your established customers. So you have to balance and be thinking about the customer, but thinking about different customers with different needs. Fourth, once you start really investing in digital transformation, as I know Koppel already is, and significantly, as you go down this road, you quickly find the problem that there are too many things you could do, too many ideas, right? And so you have to focus. And what I argue is you have to pick what are the problems that matter most to your business and to your customers, right? Which are the most, you could do a million things, but what is the problem, thinking back to Intuit? They really wanted to know for these farmers, what is the most important problem to them? So for each of your businesses, parts of the business, whether it's an internal business problem, right? We're spending too much money on this, we don't have enough information about that. Whether it's a customer problem, we're not retaining our customers, or customers are buying this from us but not that. You know, what's the problem you want to solve? And focus all of your attention and your energy on that. Fifth, you have to be ready to experiment, to test and learn, right? It's not about making a big plan and spending years executing it. It's about identifying the problem, thinking of multiple solutions that might work, and then getting in the practice and developing the habits of testing and learning very rapidly, quickly, and cheaply from the market, and seeing which ones really are the right solution for right now. 6, you have to build your digital skills, right? We typically talk about it. Talent and training is part of it, and hiring new recruits. Lots of ways we can build our skills. Part of that is our technology capability itself, our infrastructure. But you also have to think about building a digital culture. This is one of the most important things I'm seeing now in my research, is the companies that really succeed, they don't just change their process, they don't just change their strategy, but they change the culture of the people inside the company. And the companies that are succeeding most in the digital era have certain things in common in their culture, right? They're very customer-centric, right? Everyone is focused on understanding the customer. They're very data-driven, right? Wherever possible, they're always looking for data, trying to measure to help them make decisions and validate their ideas and test, right? They're very willing to take risks, right? It's a culture where people are willing to take an idea forward, even knowing that it may not work. And they say, that's fine. I don't expect everything I work on to turn out to be the best idea. I want to try different things so we can really gain some benefit and learn from the ones that won't, right? And they also tend to be very collaborative, right? They're cultures where people inside the company don't sit in a silo. Well, I'm in marketing, or I'm in sales, or I'm in merchandising, or I'm in this. People are talking across all of these different parts of the business. They're working together across different parts in a very collaborative fashion. Right? And the last step I want to suggest is you have to decide for yourself, what is your role going to be? You have to ask yourself, what is my role going to be in the digital transformation of Koppel? Right? There's no single role. It's not one thing that everyone has to do. We all will play a different part, right? Some of us might be meeting with customers and generating ideas. Others might be changing the infrastructure. Others might be, changing training systems. So many different things that may have to happen, right? But this is not something that half the company can sit on the sidelines and say, well, I'm just going to do what I always did. Those people are doing this. Everyone has to be involved, and you have to ask yourself that question, how am I going to take an active role to contribute to this? All right? Because the alternative is not very pretty, right? We all remember the dinosaurs. They were very happy. They ruled the world for millions of years. They were incredibly successful until they weren't, right? This is the challenge that businesses face. It's actually hardest, in my experience, change is hardest for the companies that are successful. If your company is struggling and losing money and going downhill, you can change. It might be too late, but people are pretty much able to change because they're scared. It's harder when you're the successful Tyrannosaurus Rex and you say, I'm the king of the planet, no one can hurt me. It's very hard to change. And so, we have to take that humility and recognize that, this is what happens to businesses who are great leaders and don't change, right? At some point, it catches up with them, right? Whether you think of Kodak, one of the world's greatest brands, incredible business for decades, they could not believe what was going to happen in the photography space. The interesting thing about Kodak, they actually invented many of the early patents for digital photography. They could innovate. They just couldn't believe the impact of their own innovations. They couldn't believe the world would change that much. And so they kept doing what they always did, and they went bankrupt. Companies like Blockbuster, they had a view of how we wanted to experience entertainment. Netflix came along with a different vision. They just couldn't believe the world was going to change that much. They say, we're so successful. How could this really be a threat to us, right? Does anyone remember the Encyclopedia Britannica? Right? 33 leather-bound volumes, the whole knowledge of the world, right? Was printed for 244 years. Imagine that, 244 years. So when they announced they were no longer printing the books, most people assumed they must have gone out of business, right? The surprising thing is they were not disrupted. The company is still here today, right? Because they have transformed themselves. This was not easy. It did not happen overnight. It was a long and difficult process, right? Who was their first digital challenger, the digital disruption of the encyclopedia business? What do you think? Now, earlier than Wikipedia. Encarta? Right. What was Encarta? It was a CD-ROM, right? All of a sudden, the CD-ROM came out, and all of a sudden, my goodness, you could put all these books on one shiny disk. So Britannica said, okay, we're going to change. Next year, we're coming out the whole encyclopedia on CD-ROM, $300, right? And then Encarta came out, an encyclopedia on a CD-ROM. And who made Encarta? Anybody remember? Microsoft. Microsoft. And what did they charge for Encarta? $0. They said it's free. This is because Bill Gates wanted to convince parents that the computer was something educational for your children. Right? Personal computer was a new thing. He said, no, it's educational. You should buy one for the kids. Look, it's got a digital encyclopedia. He just put it in for free. Right? So that was a huge disruption to Britannica. They had to respond to that. And then the internet came, and all of a sudden you've got content everywhere, and people are just looking things up. And they tried to become an online business with advertising. And then Wikipedia came. as you mentioned, right? And then they did such a good job. If you're going to do an online encyclopedia, gee, how are you going to compete with that? But the thing is, Britannica survived because they kept their focus on who? The customer. And who was always the most important customer for those encyclopedias? Who bought the most? Not parents. How many of you had the encyclopedia? Most of us not, right? They sold to parents, but it was a minority. Who was their most regular customer? Schools. Exactly. Schools. And they focused on the needs of schools, the changing needs of schools. And so what they created was a digital encyclopedia that you have to pay for your school, for your subscription. But then they kept adding new value and services. They said, we'll have all the articles, of course, and now, of course, they can have maps and video and photos and be more interactive because it's digital. But also, we're adding tools for teachers, lesson plans, right? How can you use the articles in a biology class? How can you use them in a lesson in your physics class? How can you use them for 4th grade mathematics versus 7th grade mathematics, right? They gave lesson plans, they gave quizzes and tests, and best of all, teachers' needs are always changing. Different districts, they have to teach different things, so they would create special services for different kinds of teachers. Every year they would update them. They'd say, hey, what do you need this year? What are the changing rules, the new standards? And really focusing on the needs of the customer. And that is how they transformed and succeeded as a business. In fact, their president, Jorge Cao, said, you know, a lot of people thought we went out of business when we stopped printing the books. But that wasn't true at all. We stopped publishing them, the print set, because they were trivial. It was 1% of our business. We're as profitable now as we have ever been. Right? And I like to end with this example because this was not easy. And it wasn't quick, right? It was hard. But my goodness, if Encyclopedia Britannica can transform for the digital era, then surely Koppel can transform and reach incredible new opportunities for growth, right? It's all just a matter of recognizing that digital transformation is fundamentally not really about the technology. It is much more about strategy. It's about leadership. And it's about all of us throughout the company developing new ways of thinking, right? And if we can all, in our own parts of the business, learn to think differently about our company, to think differently about our customers, think differently about our competition, about data and innovation, think differently about what is our value to the market, then Koppel will succeed and grow and transform in the digital era. Thank you. Questions from the audience? Yes.
Okay. I have only one question. Last year, I read an article in Maverick Research. Maverick is a part of Gartner company. And they say the best practices are solutions for the problems of the past. If you put your effort for best practices, you only get the mimetic change, no big change. What do you think about this?
So I think we often, in businesses that have been successful over time, and in industries that have been relatively slower moving, we've become used to the benefits of best practices. You know, look at what's been done before, the established best process for one element of your supply chain or another, and that can be very valuable. Where it's less valuable is in when you are dealing with a very fast-changing environment with some aspect of your business. And so I do see companies sometimes, they say, well, can you show us what's the best practice for doing this in this industry? I say, well, by the time that's established, you're going to be out of date, or you'll be out of business, right? That's being figured out right now. The other thing I would say is actually, this is when I was talking with the Walmart Chief Operating Officer, Jeff Schatz, and he said, I asked him about Amazon. Or actually one of my students, they said, are you watching Amazon all the time? Are you trying to figure out how you can match all the things that they do? And he said an interesting thing. He said, well, Look, of course we look at Amazon. We look at all of our competitors, and we want to be aware of what's happening. But more importantly, we try to spend more time looking at our customers. He said, look, if we only look at what someone else is doing, the best we can ever do is catch up with them, follow after them in the short term. But if we really want to understand where the opportunity is, and if we want to add value of our own that someone else hasn't done, we can only start from the customer. And if we start from the customer and we understand what their needs are that we can better solve, then we can create something that's actually unique to our business and is going to succeed in the market. Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, what's the name of the podcast? The podcast, you mentioned it before. It is available? The podcast, the Met.
Oh, the Mets podcast? I don't remember. I would go to their website. You know, I would look. They're on all the social media channels as well. They actually, one of their big successes has been Weibo in China. So they went on, they said, should we be on Weibo? And they started putting a short post there, and it's had millions and millions of viewers. But if you look on their websites, and if you look at some of the across the social media channels, you'll see they're on Instagram, they're on Weibo. I believe they have a podcast. That may be for the whole Met. It's really about figuring out what's going to work best for you. And podcast is something that's actually really grown for a lot of industries in the last 12 months. But you're going to want to try different media and see if that's one of the strategies you have, and see what works for your particular customers.
Yeah, it's like you want to see where the industry is going in the future, but how do you identify that? Like, how do you stop your company from becoming a blockbuster?
So, one of the interesting characteristics I see of companies that are good at that is they are, in terms of their kind of culture and their attitude, they are very outside in. They're very porous. They spend a lot of time talking with and interacting with people outside of the organization. And that is really essential. You know, one of the things that I talk about companies have to do is you have to develop a theory of the future. And that means both of what I call a future-facing view. A viewpoint, where do you see your industry going, or your industries, if you're in more than one? So where do we see retail going in Mexico in the next 10, 20 years, right? Where do we see financial services going, right? And then try to identify for yourself, what is the space that we want to occupy, right? Because strategy is all about choosing what you do and what you don't do, right? And say, given our strengths, who we are, if this is what the landscape is going to look like, where do we think we want to be positioned? But to get that view of the future, you have to get, that's what my friend Steve Blank says, get out of the building. He says, good entrepreneurs always get out of the building. If you're sitting inside your conference room, putting up Post-its on the wall, you're never going to understand what's going on in the lives of your customers. So companies that are very good at bringing in outside voices, sending their people out, setting up partnerships, right? Working with startups. A lot of the companies I see, part of how they do this is they set up a corporate venture fund. They're not really trying like a traditional venture capitalist to say, well, we're going to make all of our money investing in the next Facebook or Twitter. They say, look, we're going to give a little bit of money to a lot of startups primarily to learn from them, right? What are their ideas for retail? Where do they see financial services going in our industry? What problems are they trying to solve? If you think one of them is doing really great, then of course you can try to buy them or give them more money, but it's really about bringing in that relationship. And so innovation can't be something that just happens from the inside out. You have to create these different kinds of processes where you're bringing in these different viewpoints from outside. And that's what I see. The companies that have a clear understanding of where the future is going in their industry, it's because they do that. They bring in lots of perspectives.
I don't know if this is something that you can answer, but as a rule of thumb, how much of the budget of a company will you think is necessary to be investing in innovation every year? I don't know, like you have a rule of thumb for marketing and for other things. And the other one is, what is your opinion on buying innovation, on buying companies that are excelling at something and to incorporate them to your company?
Great. So, two questions. One is, how much should we be spending on innovation? And the second is, what's my opinion on buying other companies as a way of driving innovation or change? On the first, the short answer I would give is you should spend as little as possible, which maybe sounds contrarian. I mean, I'm talking about these companies doing all these big things. Obviously, they spend a lot of money. But the companies that I see that are doing a good job, at every stage, at each point, they try to spend as little as possible, at least at the beginning. So I was in Sao Paulo last year, and one of the companies I met with was BASF, big German headquartered industrial company, chemical company. And they had this really great innovation lab set up in Sao Paulo, right, trying to push the future of innovation. And I was talking with the leader who had set it up, the senior executive. He said, oh my gosh, it took me years and meetings and pushing and said, we're not going to solve the problems we need, all sitting in our rooms together. We need to create a space where we can bring in these outside voices, right? And he got it, and they had this really cool space, and he showed me, he said, look, we've got startups coming in here, we have speakers like myself, we have our business customers coming in, and we literally have a lab. We can try out different chemicals and create a shampoo and wash it in someone's hair right there in the room and test it. And we're bringing in all these clients who have business problems that we can create, a solution for. But the most interesting thing, seeing all the things they were doing in this innovation lab, was when I talked to the head of it, and I said, how many people work here? And this has been up and running for almost a year now, right? So it wasn't just an idea. And he said, Eduardo, how many of us are here full-time, year-round? And Eduardo said, you and me, boss. 2 people. Now, he said the innovation in his lab is busy. There's people in here every day. But he said, we intentionally kept it very small. He said, I don't want to be working on problems that don't matter to the customer. I don't want to be working on problems that don't matter to our business. So every project we do, someone's coming in from outside, which may be another part of the company, it may be their business customers, it may be a startup, a combination, but everything they're doing is that way. And this is something I see is really important. When you innovate in this different way, you try to spend less upfront, and only later, when you really prove out an opportunity, okay, and then the client says, yeah, this is actually the right chemical we need, we have a product we're going to use, we want to launch this in Europe next year, okay, now we're going to spend some money, because now it's a business. Right? Now it's an actual business opportunity. So it's a little paradoxical. It's not a percentage, right? But it's more philosophy that when you have more uncertainty at the beginning stages of innovation, you actually want to spend less. And only as it evolves and the idea becomes more real and more of a business do you want to spend the money. So it's like delay spending the money as long as you can. Second part was acquisitions. Acquisitions can be very helpful. Acquisitions can be valuable for a few ways. I mean, the old school was acquisitions. We were talking about this last night. You buy a company because it makes money, right? You look at the balance sheet. Okay, it's going to add to our top line or revenue or give us more market share. More important now as we think about acquisitions in terms of the strategic impact, right? Is this company going to bring us new technology, intellectual property, some kind of new asset, right? Is it going to allow us to go into a new space or reach a new market we're not currently serving, right? This will bring us access to a different kind of customer. But the really interesting thing I see now about acquisitions is when they go right, they can also be an agent of change in the culture. But you have to be very conscious about that. The old school idea was a big company buys a small company, and they say, great, you have to turn into our company. You have to adopt our culture. The smartest companies today I see do the opposite. They buy a company because its culture is different. And they say, we know how we want to change. This company is already kind of like that, right? So we want to buy them and bring them in a way that they help us become a little bit more like them, rather than them becoming like us. Right? So I think that's my advice is the most important value in acquisitions.
How do you think the movie theater industry is staying relevant or will stay relevant amidst all this streaming revolution? The movie theater industry.
Which industry? The movie industry?
The movie theater industry. The movie theaters.
Movie theaters. Do you guys have movie theaters?
Yeah.
You do? Okay.
And we are still going.
No, I had this conversation with it's interesting, I was talking with another business year or so ago, diversified like you guys, and they had a movie division. And they were having this weird conversation where they said, look, we want to invest in our theaters because there's the new 3D and IMAX and some of the new technologies that people will pay more for. And we're seeing good profits from it, so we want to upgrade our theaters. But our top management team says, well, why do we want to spend money on the theaters? Don't you know Netflix is going to kill all the theaters, right? Which I thought was a very interesting but mistaken point of view. Part of the mistake is looking at two different time frames as if they were the same. So if you look at the impact of streaming on movie theaters, we're looking at a long-term change. If you look at, in their case, they were asking for an innovation investment that they were going to spend this year and make money back over the next 3 to 4 years. And I said that Netflix is not a reason not to do that, right? The longer term, the Netflix threat is longer term. And so we have to be thinking about our investments both in terms of near term and medium term and long term and different kinds of strategies. In terms of my forecast, I think movie theaters as a business will remain. I think it's a little bit like retail. When e-commerce first started to take off, there was an assumption, I've seen this in so many industries, e-books. Who reads a book on your phone or your Kindle or something like that, right? So when e-books first took off, it started from nothing and it was growing really fast. And I was working with some of the biggest book publishers in the world. They looked at this growth rate and said, look how much grown in 3 years, and they drew a dotted line. That's what we do in business. There's always a chart, and the first half of the chart is real data, and the second half is your imagination, right? It's always, the line keeps going up. And they said, we're going to have to stop printing books. It's just everything's going to go to ebook. But that wasn't actually what happened, right? It turned out sometimes we like a paper book, sometimes we like an ebook. Same thing with retail. E-commerce taking off. It's so fast, it's so convenient. People said, oh, there's going to be no more stores in 10 years, right? Maybe 20, maybe 10, maybe, we don't know when, but eventually no stores, 0 stores. It turned out that isn't really where we're going. As I said at the beginning, we're looking at an omni-channel environment, and that means the same customer wants to have the physical channel, the physical store, and the online buying experience, and be able to go back and forth between them for different times and different needs, right? And I think the same thing is happening with entertainment. We're creating these wonderful experiences where you sit at home in your living room or your bedroom and you binge watch your Netflix, right? And that's pretty great. People are spending a lot of time doing that. But it's actually a different experience to go out with friends, get a bite of food, go into a movie theater, see something funny with a lot of people around you all laughing at the same time. It's a different experience. Now, it may be that we're going to have fewer theaters in the long run because sometimes we went to the movies and we would have rather stayed home, but now we can. But I don't think it's one is replacing the other. I think movie theaters will have to be more and more an experience, more social, and really focusing on that, the pleasure of going out and being with other people and being in a space. And those things have to become more and more part of it. And that'll determine how much we spend our time, I think still in theaters, but also more and more on streaming media.
Muy bien, con esto concluimos nuestra sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Agradecemos, por supuesto, a David Rogers. Muchísimas gracias por ser parte de esta convención Coppel 2020. Un fuerte aplauso.
Thank you.
Los que se hayan quedado con más preguntas, bueno, los invitamos para que lo sigan en su LinkedIn, que ahí aparece justamente cómo lo pueden encontrar, para que sea él directamente quien las resuelva. Muchísimas gracias, David Rogers. Gracias por acompañarnos. Agradecemos a todos también y les recordamos que